I drove 9 hours in a blizzard to surprise my wife. I hope he dies, she said, because she hoped for my death for insurance money. I drove away and gave her a different surprise. After driving 9 hours through a merciless snowstorm to surprise my wife on her birthday, I walked through the door with her favorite cake and heard her tell her sister something that shattered my world. God, I hope he crashes and dies. I could really use that insurance money, she said with a laugh. Her sister Mia replied, or at least get him hospitalized for a few months so we don't have to deal with his pathetic presence. They both erupted in laughter like it was the funniest joke they'd ever shared. I left the cake on the counter, turned around, and walked out of what I thought was my life. 3 weeks later, she would discover that her casual cruelty had cost her everything. So I'm Noah, 33M, and my wife Abigail, 31F, had been married for 7 years before she decided my death would be more valuable than my life. Classic love story, right? High school sweethearts, broke up for college, reconnected at a mutual friend's wedding, and I thought the rest was history. Things hadn't been great lately, but I'd attributed that to normal marriage difficulties. Abigail had grown distant over the past 6 months, spending more time with her sister Mia and friends who drove luxury cars they couldn't afford and took extravagant vacations funded by debt. Abigail had started making pointed comments about our house being just a starter home and asking when I planned to level up career-wise. I'd chalked it up to temporary dissatisfaction. We lived well, I thought. Nice 3-bedroom house, 2 reliable cars, annual vacations, emergency savings. We weren't wealthy, but we were secure and happy. Or at least I was happy. Last week marked Abigail's birthday, and February birthdays in the Midwest are notoriously difficult. The weather is brutal, snow cancels plans, and everyone's stuck indoors. I decided to do something special this year, something that would show her how much I cherished our life together. Her actual birthday fell on a Tuesday, but she'd mentioned wanting to visit Mia that weekend for some spa day they'd planned. I told her I couldn't get away from work, a calculated lie. I'd actually arranged to take Friday off, crafting an elaborate surprise. The plan was romantic. Surprise her at Mia's place Friday evening with her favorite birthday cake from the expensive bakery, then take her to the fancy restaurant I'd booked weeks in advance. I'd even packed her favorite dress and shoes. I had envisioned her face lighting up with joy, maybe even tears of happiness at my unexpected gesture. The weather reports Thursday night looked ominous. Winter storm warnings predicted 6 to 10 inches of snow across 3 states. Most sensible people would have canceled, but I wasn't thinking sensibly. I was thinking like a devoted husband who wanted to prove his love despite his wife's growing coldness. I left at 7 Friday morning, what should have been a 6-hour drive transforming into a 9-hour odyssey through weather that belonged in a disaster movie. White-knuckle driving through thick snow, 3 accidents reducing traffic to a crawl, 2 emergency coffee stops to stay alert. But through every miserable mile, I kept imagining Abigail's surprised delight. I reached Mia's neighborhood around 4 in the afternoon, parking a block away because the plows hadn't reached the streets. I grabbed the cake and trudged through ankle-deep snow, my jeans soaked by the time I reached the door. It was unlocked, and I could hear their voices from the kitchen, laughter and wine glasses clinking. I was about to call out when I heard my name mentioned, and something in Abigail's tone made me freeze. Noah texted earlier saying he was stuck at work. Abigail was saying, dismissive contempt clear in her voice. Probably still there staring at spreadsheets like the boring accountant he is. Mia's response was equally cutting. In this weather, any decent company would have sent everyone home. He's probably on the couch playing that stupid game like the man-child he is. I stood there holding the cake I'd driven 9 hours to deliver, listening to my wife mock every aspect of my character. This wasn't playful teasing. This was character assassination disguised as systole venting. At least he's not here ruining your birthday weekend, Mia continued. Can you imagine if he'd shown up? He'd insist on coming to dinner tonight and tell those same boring stories. Then tomorrow he'd get that pathetic puppy dog look when you want to go out without him. Abigail's laughter filled the kitchen. God, you're so right. He's become so clingy lately, always wanting to do couple things. It's honestly suffocating. Sometimes I think he loves me more than I could ever love him, and that just makes me resent him more. The casual cruelty hit me like a physical blow, but I remained frozen, unable to move forward or retreat. I thought my devotion was a strength, but she saw it as weakness. Well, at least he's safely out of the way tonight, Mia said. The roads are treacherous. Some poor bastards are probably going to die out there in this weather. There was a pause. Then Abigail said something that would echo in my mind for months. God, I hope he crashes and dies. I could really use that insurance money. 500,000 would buy more happiness than his presence ever could. I must have made some sound because they went quiet. I thought I'd been discovered, but then Mia's voice broke the silence, or at least get him hospitalized for a few months so you could have some peace and figure out what you really want. They both burst into genuine laughter, delighted cackling at the thought of my death or injury. I stood there holding that cake, processing that my wife had just wished for my demise as casually as wishing for good weather. I don't remember making a conscious decision. My body moved on autopilot, walking into the kitchen where they sat with wine glasses raised like a toast to my hypothetical destruction. Their faces when they saw me will be burned into my memory forever. I've never seen color drain from someone's face so quickly. Abigail's wine glass slipped and shattered on the floor, red wine spreading like blood across the tiles. "Noah," she whispered. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. I walked to the counter, placed the birthday cake next to their wine bottle, and turned around. As I walked back through the snow, I could hear Abigail calling my name, but I didn't look back. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before my hands stopped shaking enough to start the engine. My phone started buzzing immediately. 17 missed calls, 38 text messages growing more frantic. I read none of them. Instead, I drove to the nearest motel, paid $80 for a room that smelled like cigarettes, turned off my phone, and stared at the ceiling until sunrise, replaying those words. "I hope he crashes and dies." When I turned my phone back on, there were 63 texts and 29 missed calls. I didn't read them. I simply texted my friend Theodore. "Something happened with Abigail. Need a place to crash." Theodore replied, "Doors unlocked, beers in the fridge." I drove the 9 hours back while Abigail was still at Mia's, packed 3 suitcases of essentials, grabbed my important documents, and went to Theodore's. That was 3 days ago, and I still haven't spoken to Abigail, though not for her lack of trying. She's called from multiple numbers, left voicemails ranging from tearful to angry, and even showed up at my workplace. I called in sick to avoid that confrontation. I needed time to think, to plan, to decide how to handle the ruins of my marriage without letting emotion cloud my judgment. Today, I took concrete steps to protect myself. I moved half our joint savings into a new account, froze our joint credit cards, changed all my passwords, and told my boss I needed to work remotely due to a family emergency. It's methodical and logical, which feels strange because inside, I feel like I'm in free fall. The thing that keeps me awake isn't even the insurance comment. It's the laughter. The easy way they found humor in the thought of my suffering. Who does that? Who wishes death on someone they're supposed to love and then laughs about it? I've been wondering about that life insurance policy we took out 3 years ago. It's not huge, $500,000, but apparently enough to make someone hope their husband dies in a car accident. The fact that she knew the exact amount and mentioned it so casually suggests she's thought about this before. Our friends have started reaching out, apparently because Abigail's telling people we had a misunderstanding, and I'm overreacting to something taken out of context. Classic gaslighting technique. One friend even texted saying, "Whatever happened, I'm sure you guys can work through it," without even asking for my side. I haven't told anyone what I actually heard, not even Theodore, though he's been incredibly supportive without prying. Last night, I finally read some of Abigail's texts, and they follow a predictable pattern that reveals more about her character than any marriage counseling session ever could. First, confusion. "Where did you go? Why did you leave?" Then defensiveness. "It was just dark humor between sisters. You weren't supposed to hear that." Then anger. "You're being incredibly childish. Answer your damn phone." Then manipulation. "I'm worried about you. Please let me know you're safe." Then threats. "If you don't call me back, I'm calling the police to report you missing." And finally, self-pity. "I can't believe you're doing this to me on my birthday weekend." Notice what's missing from that progression? Not one genuine apology. Not one acknowledgement of how devastating her words were. After reading those messages, I blocked her number entirely. I'm not ready to talk to her, and I may never be ready. Today, I met with a financial advisor named Milton who a coworker recommended, and we spent 2 hours going through our finances with forensic thoroughness. I discovered some interesting things, like how Abigail had been spending $1,800 a month on online shopping for the past year, or how she'd taken out a store credit card I didn't know about with a $3,000 balance. Milton helped me create a plan to disentangle our finances as cleanly as possible while protecting my interests. The joint account I left untouched has enough money for this month's mortgage and utilities. After that, she'll need to figure out how to cover our household expenses without my contribution. And given her spending habits, that's going to be a wake-up call she's not prepared for. I'm not trying to leave her destitute, but I need her to understand that actions have consequences. The strangest part is that I still catch myself wondering if I'm overreacting. Maybe it really was just dark humor amplified by wine and systole bonding. But then I remember her tone, the casual way she said those words, the genuine laughter that followed, and I know I'm not overreacting. The woman who could laugh at the thought of my death is not the woman I thought I married. Theodore thinks I should talk to her, if only to get closure and hear her explanation. Maybe he's right, but right now I'm still processing the complete recalibration of my understanding of my marriage. I'm trying to figure out who this person is that I've been sharing a bed with for 7 years, someone capable of such casual cruelty. Tomorrow marks 4 days of complete silence from my end, and Abigail's sister Mia tried calling today. I didn't answer, but I'm curious what spin she's putting on this situation. Then our neighbor Lydia texted saying Abigail was crying on her front step because I'd changed the garage door code. Part of me feels bad about that, but most of me doesn't. The thing that haunts me most isn't even the immediate betrayal. It's the realization that this contempt didn't develop overnight. This level of casual cruelty suggests months or years of growing resentment that I was apparently too naive to notice. How many red flags did I miss? How many smaller cruelties did I dismiss as just her having a bad day? I've also been thinking about that life insurance policy in more practical terms. $500,000 isn't life-changing money, but it's apparently enough to make someone hope their spouse dies in a car accident. The fact that she knew the exact amount and mentioned it so casually suggests she's thought about this before. I know this update is getting long, but writing it all out helps me process the magnitude of what's happened. Theodore's got a friend who's a divorce lawyer, and I'm meeting him for coffee tomorrow. Not sure if that's where this is heading, but I need to understand my options and protect myself legally. For anyone wondering what I'm going to do next, I honestly don't know yet. Part of me wants to disappear completely, change my number, move to a different state, start over. Another part wants a confrontation, wants to see her face when I repeat her exact words back to her, wants her to feel 1/10 of the pain I'm experiencing. But mostly, I just want this hollow feeling in my chest to go away. For now, I'm taking it one day at a time, keeping my head down, making smart decisions, and letting her wonder where I am, what I know, and what I'm planning to do. She wanted me gone so badly, she wished for my death. Well, congratulations, Abigail. You got your wish. I'm gone, just not in the way you hoped. If there's interest, I'll update as things develop. Thanks for letting me vent to strangers on the internet. Sometimes anonymous support is exactly what you need when your entire world gets turned upside down. Still standing, still breathing, but definitely not the same man who walked into that kitchen 3 days ago. Update. The Reckoning. Quick recap for newcomers. I drove 9 hours through a blizzard to surprise my wife Abigail for her birthday, only to overhear her telling her sister she hoped I'd crash and die for the insurance money. Left the cake on the counter and walked out. Been staying at my friend Theodore's for a week now while sorting out the nuclear fallout. It's been exactly 10 days since I heard those words that keep replaying in my head like a demonic mantra. God, I hope he crashes and dies. I could really use that insurance money. 10 days of radio silence from my end, while Abigail's attempts to contact me have evolved from desperate to angry to manipulative and back to desperate again. Last Wednesday, day 7 of my self-imposed exile, I woke up with a plan. I waited until 9:30 when I knew Abigail would be at work, then went home with 3 empty suitcases and Theodore's pickup truck to begin the systematic removal of my existence from the place I'd called home for 5 years. The house looked exactly the same as when I'd left it, like a museum exhibit of our former life. But it felt fundamentally different now, foreign, like walking onto a movie set designed to look like my life rather than the actual place where I'd lived and loved and apparently been quietly despised. I started in the bedroom, methodically packing all my clothes except the ones Abigail had specifically chosen for me over the years. I left those hanging in the closet like abandoned cocoons. I took my grandmother's antique watch from the dresser, my collection of journals from the bookshelf, and the external hard drive containing all our photos. In the office, I disconnected my entire gaming setup that she'd mocked so cruelly to her sister. Throughout the house, I systematically erased my presence while leaving evidence of our shared life intact. My books disappeared, but the bookshelf remained. My tools vanished from the garage, but the workbench stayed. I left all our framed photos exactly where they were, my smiling face a constant reminder of what she'd thrown away. Before I left, I did 3 things that felt necessary. First, I turned the thermostat down to 62 degrees. Abigail had always been cold-natured, constantly complaining if the temperature dropped below 70. Second, I unscrewed the light bulb from inside the refrigerator, a tiny inconvenience that would take her days to notice, but would irritate her every time she opened it at night. Third, I changed the Wi-Fi password to I hope he crashes 2023 and unplugged the router entirely. As I locked the door behind me, our neighbor Lydia was collecting her mail and couldn't help but notice Theodore's truck loaded with my belongings. She looked from the truck to me with raised eyebrows, clearly fishing for information. I just shrugged and told her I was taking some things to donate to charity. She didn't believe me for a second, but Midwest politeness prevented her from prying further. Back at Theodore's, I stacked everything in his garage except for 2 suitcases of immediate necessities. He helped me unload without asking a single question, just handed me a cold beer when we finished and said, "Sometimes life kicks you square in the teeth, and all you can do is spit out the blood and keep standing." Thursday became financial reckoning day. I met with Milton again, and he'd spent the intervening days gathering comprehensive information about our joint accounts and shared debts. What he showed me was even worse than I'd initially discovered. Abigail hadn't just been overspending on shopping. She'd been systematically hiding her financial irresponsibility from me for over a year. $300 here, $500 there, all withdrawn from our joint checking account with no explanations. Over $12,000 in the past year that had simply vanished into her secret lifestyle. Milton helped me draft a formal letter requesting immediate financial separation. Not divorce papers yet, but a clear legal statement that I would no longer be responsible for any new debts she incurred. We had it delivered by courier to her workplace, a deliberately public humiliation that ensured her coworkers would witness her receiving legal documents. I also canceled every shared streaming service and subscription, changed passwords on all our cloud storage accounts, and redirected my mail to a post office box. Friday morning brought my first venture into social media since this nightmare began. 17 Facebook messages from concerned friends, 34 Instagram DMs asking if I was okay. I ignored all the direct inquiries and posted exactly one thing: a photo of a half-eaten birthday cake sitting abandoned on a kitchen counter. No caption, no explanation, just the cake that represented everything our marriage had become. Within an hour, my phone exploded with activity. Friends texting to ask what the cryptic image meant. Abigail calling 6 times in 20 minutes from different numbers. Her best friend Jill sending increasingly frantic messages asking if I was okay because Abigail was really worried about my mental state. I answered none of them, but the message was clear. The birthday surprise had gone very wrong, and there would be consequences. Saturday brought the first real confrontation since I'd walked out of Mia's kitchen. I was at the grocery store when someone called my name. I turned around to find Mia herself standing there with a shopping basket, looking like she'd seen a ghost. She started with the usual script. Abigail was worried sick. Everyone was concerned. Wouldn't I please just talk to my wife and work this out? When I didn't respond, her tone shifted to something more accusatory. She said I was being childish and vindictive, that it was just harmless sister talk, that I was blowing everything completely out of proportion. I finally broke my silence and asked her point blank whether she thought wishing death on your spouse for insurance money qualified as normal sister bonding. Asked if she'd want her own boyfriend to overhear her expressing similar sentiments. Asked if she understood that her harmless joke was actually the culmination of months of growing contempt that I'd been too naive to recognize. She didn't have ready answers for any of those questions, just stammered something about misunderstandings and context. I left my half-filled cart right there in the aisle and walked out without another word. Betty? Yes. Satisfying? Also yes. Sunday passed quietly. Theodore had friends over to watch football, and they all knew something significant was happening without needing details. They just made room on the couch, handed me beers, and included me in their casual conversation about everything except relationships and marriage. For 3 hours, I almost felt normal again. Monday brought harsh reality. My temporary leave from work officially began, which meant unlimited time to think about the half-empty house across town and the woman who was probably discovering more evidence of my systematic departure. My phone showed 15 missed calls from Abigail overnight, and I finally listened to one voicemail. Her voice sounded different, scratchy and raw like she hadn't been sleeping. She said the house felt wrong without me, that she'd started noticing more of my things missing each day, and it was scaring her more than she'd expected. Something about her word choice, treating our marriage like a disposable modern relationship you could simply abandon without explanation, hardened my resolve even further. I texted Theodore that I was going for a drive and found myself parked outside our house for almost an hour. Her car wasn't in the driveway, but the porch light was on even though it was midday. The recycling bin at the curb was overflowing with wine bottles, evidence of how she was coping with my absence. Tuesday brought another unpleasant financial surprise. I received a notification from our credit card company about unusual activity And when I checked the details, I discovered that Abigail had gone on an epic shopping spree. Over $2,000 at department stores and boutiques in a single afternoon, either retail therapy or deliberate financial sabotage. I immediately called the credit card company, reported the card as stolen, and had a new one sent to my post office box. Another bridge burned. That evening, I finally posted something more substantial on social media. Just a simple status update. Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing, vague enough to mean anything to casual observers, specific enough for people who knew our situation to understand that something serious had happened and I was handling it with deliberate intent rather than emotional chaos. Wednesday marked exactly 2 weeks since I'd heard those devastating words in Mia's kitchen. I met with a lawyer that Theodore had recommended, a straightforward guy who laid out my options with brutal honesty. Divorce would be relatively simple since we had no children, but the house and intertwined finances would still create complications. He suggested a formal separation first, giving both of us time to untangle our lives properly while establishing legal boundaries. I agreed immediately, and he drafted the paperwork on the spot. Thursday brought the confrontation I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. I was working remotely from Theodore's dining room table when the doorbell rang. Theodore answered and came back looking distinctly uncomfortable, saying that Abigail was outside in tears, demanding to see me, and refusing to leave until I agreed to talk to her. I sat there frozen with my coffee cup halfway to my lips, caught between the desire to finally confront her and the fear that seeing her would somehow weaken my resolve. So I nodded to Theodore, and he reluctantly led her into his home. She looked absolutely terrible. Hair unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail, eyes red-rimmed from crying, wearing what appeared to be the same sweater she'd had on for several days. She stood in the doorway staring at me like she couldn't quite believe I was real. She spoke first, asking if I was really planning to have her served with separation papers. Apparently, the lawyer's office had called to verify our address, and she'd pressed the assistant until they revealed the purpose of their call. I confirmed that yes, separation papers were being prepared. She asked why I wouldn't talk to her, wouldn't let her explain what had really happened. I told her there was nothing to explain because I'd heard everything I needed to hear. She insisted it wasn't what I thought, that she'd been stressed about work and bills, that it was just dark humor between siblings after too much wine. That's when I decided to play my trump card. I asked her if she remembered exactly what she'd said that night. She hesitated, then claimed she'd said something about wishing I would just crash on the couch for a while, and that I had misheard her words. I pulled out my phone and played the audio recording. Yes, I had a recording of the entire conversation, not because I'd planned it, but because I'd been using a voice memo app during the drive to record gift ideas for her birthday. I'd never stopped the recording when I arrived at Mia's house, pure accident or divine intervention. Her exact words filled Theodore's living room in her exact voice. God, I hope he crashes and dies. I could really use that insurance money, followed by Mia's response. Or at least get him hospitalized for a few months so you could have some peace, followed by their genuine, delighted laughter. The color drained from Abigail's face as she heard herself wishing for my demise with such casual cruelty. She tried to grab my phone, probably to delete the evidence, but I moved it out of her reach. She started crying harder, insisting it was taken out of context, that she'd never actually hurt me, that she loved me despite what those terrible words suggested. I asked her one simple question that cut through all her excuses. Would you have ever told me about this conversation if I hadn't overheard it myself? Her silence was more revealing than any answer she could have given. Theodore had made himself scarce when she arrived, but now he returned to the room, awkwardly suggesting that maybe we should continue this conversation another time when emotions weren't running so high. Abigail ignored him completely, focusing entirely on me with the desperate intensity of someone watching their entire world collapse. She started listing all the things she'd realized during the past 2 weeks of my absence. How much she depended on me financially and emotionally, how empty the house felt without my presence, how she couldn't sleep in our bed alone, how she'd never actually meant to hurt me and would spend the rest of her life making amends if I'd just come home. It was a masterful performance, complete with terse, trembling hands, and a voice that broke at all the right emotional moments. 2 weeks earlier, I might have been moved by this display of apparent remorse and desperation, but something fundamental had changed in me during those 14 days of silence and reflection. So I told her the truth as gently as I could manage. I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. The separation papers weren't about punishing her for one terrible comment. They were about protecting myself while I tried to determine if there was anything left of our marriage worth saving. She didn't take this news well. She started saying I was throwing away 7 years of marriage over one stupid comment made during a moment of stress and wine-induced poor judgment. That everyone says things they don't mean when they're venting to family members. That I was being cruel and vindictive by disappearing without warning and ignoring her attempts to communicate. I just sat there letting her words wash over me without really penetrating my consciousness. When she finally exhausted herself, I told her that the separation papers would be delivered the next day, and she should read them carefully before deciding how to respond. She left sobbing, mascara streaked down her face, looking like a woman who'd finally realized that actions have consequences. Theodore returned after she'd gone, carrying 2 beers and commenting that he'd just witnessed the most uncomfortable domestic drama since his parents' divorce 20 years earlier. That night, I couldn't sleep, kept replaying her performance, trying to distinguish between genuine remorse and panic at being caught. Friday morning brought the delivery of separation papers as promised, and by Friday afternoon, Abigail's sister was posting passive-aggressive social media statuses about men who overreact and destroy marriages over simple misunderstandings. But something unexpected happened too. Abigail's best friend Jill sent me a private message saying she'd heard the whole story now, including what Abigail had actually said, and she was sorry I was going through this. She mentioned that she'd known Abigail since college and had witnessed her make similarly cutting remarks about other people over the years. It was the first message from anyone in Abigail's social circle that acknowledged the legitimacy of my pain rather than trying to minimize it or pressure me into forgiveness. I didn't respond, but it planted a seed of validation that maybe Abigail's cruel comment wasn't an isolated incident but a pattern of behavior. The weekend passed quietly. Theodore had a date, so I had the house to myself for the first time since this ordeal began. I ordered pizza, watched a science fiction series that Abigail had always refused to watch with me, and tried not to think about the fact that in another timeline, I'd be at home with my wife enjoying our monthly pizza and movie night tradition. Sunday night, Abigail sent me a text message with just 2 words. I'm sorry. It was the first genuine apology in 18 days of this nightmare. No excuses attached, no demands to talk, just those 2 simple words. I didn't respond, but I thought about them longer than I probably should have. Monday morning marked day 19 of this new reality, and I woke up to discover Abigail sitting in her car outside Theodore's house, just parked there watching the front door like some kind of heartbroken stalker. Theodore spotted her first and pointed her out through the kitchen window with obvious concern. I called her and asked what she thought she was doing. She said she just needed to see me in person to confirm that I was really okay, that she wouldn't approach the house or cause a scene. She just needed visual confirmation. It was both disturbing and oddly touching. This desperate need for reassurance from the same woman who'd casually wished for my death. I told her to go home, that this surveillance wasn't helping either of us. She asked if I'd received her apology message. I confirmed that I had. She asked if I believed that she was genuinely sorry. I told her honestly that I didn't know what to believe anymore. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. Are you going to file for divorce? I gave her the only honest answer I could. I hadn't decided yet. The separation would give us both time to figure out what we actually wanted. She sat in her car for another hour before finally driving away, and I spent that time watching her through the window, trying to reconcile this broken, desperate woman with the one who'd laughed about my potential death. That afternoon, Theodore suggested we change the locks on my house, just as a precaution. I agreed, and we spent several hours installing new deadbolts, another small step in the process of separating my life from Abigail's. Today marks exactly 3 weeks since that night at Mia's house. 3 weeks of silence, separation, and slowly rebuilding my sense of self-worth after discovering that the person I loved most in the world had been secretly wishing for my death. I'm not sleeping great, but I'm sleeping better than I was. I miss stupid things about our shared life. The way Abigail always bought expensive coffee, how she'd sing off-key in the shower every morning, her collection of fuzzy socks that somehow always migrated to my side of the bed. But I don't miss the growing contempt I now realize had been building for months. I don't miss walking on eggshells around her increasingly critical moods. I don't miss the subtle put-downs disguised as humor. The separation papers had been signed and filed officially. We're now in a legal separation period that will last 6 months, during which we're still technically married but living apart with completely separated finances. At the end of those 6 months, we either reconcile and rebuild our marriage or proceed with divorce proceedings. 3 weeks ago, I would have said reconciliation was absolutely impossible. Now I'm less certain. Not because I've forgiven her or forgotten what she said, but because untangling a 7-year marriage turns out to be incredibly complicated in ways I never anticipated. As I finish writing this update, my phone buzzes with another message from Abigail. Can we meet somewhere neutral just to talk? Please. I don't know what I'm going to say in response. Part of me wants to hear whatever explanation she's prepared. Part of me thinks any conversation will just prolong the inevitable. Most of me is exhausted by the entire situation and ready for some kind of resolution. I'll update again if anything significant develops. Thanks for all the support and advice on my previous post. Some of you are absolutely diabolical, but I appreciate the solidarity from fellow survivors of relationship betrayal. Still standing, still breathing, still figuring out who I am without the woman who wished I wasn't. Final update. The end of everything. It's been exactly 90 days since I left that birthday cake on Mia's counter and walked out of what I thought was my marriage. 90 days of silence, separation, legal proceedings, and more personal growth than I ever wanted to experience in such a short time. This will be my final update because there's only so many ways you can analyze the death of a relationship before even the internet gets tired of the story. The coffee shop meeting happened 2 weeks after my last update. I arrived 15 minutes early because anxiety has a way of making you compulsively punctual. We met at Groundwork downtown, busy enough for natural background noise, but not so crowded that we'd be overheard by strangers who might recognize our story. I chose a corner table, ordered black coffee I had no intention of drinking, and waited for the woman who'd once been my entire world to arrive and explain why she'd wished for my death. Abigail walked in exactly on time, not 5 minutes late like she usually was for everything. Her hair was professionally styled. She wore light makeup and simple clothes, with the flashy designer purse I'd always hated replaced by a plain canvas tote bag. Every choice seemed strategic, designed to project humility rather than the materialism that had poisoned our marriage. The first words out of her mouth weren't hello. Instead, she announced that she'd lost 7 pounds since I'd left, dropping this information like it was supposed to carry some deeper meaning about her suffering. Using weight loss as relationship currency was such a perfectly Abigail move that I almost smiled despite the circumstances. I didn't acknowledge her opening gambit, just asked directly why she'd wanted to meet. She pulled out a yellow legal pad covered with handwritten notes, which was so unexpected that I nearly laughed. This woman who'd rather die than make a grocery list had apparently pointed her way through whatever speech she'd prepared. Her first point was a comprehensive apology. She claimed to be genuinely, deeply sorry for what she'd said that night, acknowledging that it was cruel and thoughtless and completely inexcusable. She explained that she'd been stressed about work, frustrated that I was missing her birthday weekend, and had been drinking wine with Mia all afternoon. The words had just come out without any real thought or meaning. I interrupted to ask about the laughter that had followed her death wish. She flinched like I'd physically struck her, then claimed it was nervous laughter, that Mia always brought out her worst instincts, that it was a stupid attempt to seem edgy and sophisticated in front of her sister. Her second point focused on taking our relationship for granted. She admitted that she'd gotten comfortable with the security and stability I provided, both financially and emotionally, and had stopped appreciating everything I contributed to our life together. Instead of gratitude, she developed a sense of entitlement that had gradually transformed into resentment. Third, she claimed that the past 3 months had been a complete wake-up call about how much she depended on me. Not just for money, though she was honest about that aspect, but emotionally and practically. She said the house was too quiet without me, that she'd started talking to herself just to hear another voice. Fourth, she wanted to propose couples therapy with a specialist who focused on rebuilding trust after betrayal. She'd already researched therapists, found someone with excellent credentials, and even booked a preliminary consultation for the following week if I'd agree to participate. Throughout this prepared presentation, I sat there drinking increasingly cold coffee and studying her face for any sign of the woman who'd casually discussed my potential death. Was this genuine remorse and growth, or just another performance designed to get what she wanted? When she finished her rehearsed remarks, she set the legal pad aside and looked directly at me for the first time, asking what I was thinking about everything she'd said. I told her I was thinking about parallel universes and alternate timelines. In another reality, I never drove through that blizzard, never overheard her conversation with Mia, never discovered what she really thought about my continued existence. In that universe, I'd still be living in blissful ignorance, sharing a bed every night with someone capable of laughing about my death. She started crying then, not the dramatic sobbing from our confrontation at Theodore's house, but quiet tears that she kept wiping away like they were an inconvenience. I laid out my position as clearly as I could. The separation would continue for the full 6 months as legally required. I wouldn't be moving back into our house during that time, and I wasn't ready to commit to couples therapy yet. I wasn't saying never to reconciliation, but I wasn't saying yes either. I needed the full separation period to determine whether the foundation of our marriage had been so thoroughly damaged that no amount of counseling could repair it. She nodded through each point like she was absorbing small blows but had expected them. When I finished outlining my terms, she asked the question that had probably been haunting her for months. "Do you hate me now?" The strange thing was, I didn't hate her. I still don't. There's anger and disappointment and profound hurt, but not hatred. Hatred requires a level of emotional investment that I'm not sure I can sustain anymore. I told her that honestly, and she seemed genuinely surprised. She said she'd been telling herself that I must hate her to shut her out so completely that it would almost be easier if I did hate her because it would mean I still cared enough to feel something that intense. That observation stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. Our conversation wound down after that exchange. We agreed to communicate through email about practical matters like mortgage payments and utility bills. She'd continue covering the house expenses since her name was on everything too, and I'd contribute my share of ongoing costs. We'd reassess our situation at the 3-month mark of the separation. As we prepared to leave, she hesitated and asked if she could hug me goodbye. I said no, and she nodded like she'd expected that answer, but had needed to ask anyway. She gathered her things and walked out, leaving me alone with my cold coffee and the surreal feeling of having such a businesslike conversation with someone who'd seen me at my most vulnerable. 7 years of shared history reduced to bullet points on a legal pad and tentative email arrangements for bill payments. Life settled into a strange new routine after that meeting. I extended my remote work arrangement through the end of the month, and Theodore's spare room became less of a temporary crash pad and more of an actual living space. I established patterns: morning runs, 8 hours of work, gym 3 times a week, cooking dinner with Theodore when our schedules aligned. The minimal contact strategy continued to yield unexpected results. With limited communication from me, Abigail seemed to be engaging in genuine self-reflection for perhaps the first time in our relationship. Her sister Mia sent me a surprisingly humble message about a week after the coffee shop meeting, acknowledging that she'd been a terrible influence on Abigail for years, encouraging meanness disguised as honesty and brutal humor disguised as sophisticated sisterly bonding. She said she was disgusted with herself for laughing that night and didn't expect forgiveness, just wanted me to know that she understood her role in creating the toxic dynamic that had destroyed my marriage. I didn't respond to her message, but I took screenshots, not for future leverage, but to remind myself that I hadn't been crazy or oversensitive about feeling betrayed. Around day 45, the financial reality of our separation started hitting Abigail harder than either of us had anticipated. Her friend Jill reached out again with an update I hadn't requested but found grimly satisfying. Abigail was struggling to maintain her lifestyle on just her income, had been forced to cancel her monthly spa membership and several other subscription services, and was even considering finding a roommate to help with mortgage payments. I noted the attempted manipulation, using a mutual friend to make me feel guilty about her financial struggles, but I didn't take the bait. I thanked Jill for the information and suggested that if Abigail wanted to discuss financial arrangements, she could contact my lawyer directly. Something shifted in Abigail's approach around day 60. Her emails became less emotional and more practical. She started selling expensive clothes and accessories on resale websites, got rid of her impractical second car that she'd insisted on buying despite my concerns, and even mentioned that she was considering taking night classes to increase her earning potential. It was like watching someone mature rapidly under pressure, finally accepting adult responsibility for their choices and consequences. Strangely, I felt proud of her growth, even as I remained committed to not rescuing her from the natural results of her actions. Day 70 brought an unexpected development. I checked my post office box and found a thick envelope from Abigail containing a handwritten letter, 10 pages front and back, along with a USB drive. The letter was essentially a complete timeline of our relationship from her perspective, examining every major moment, both positive and negative, with a level of honesty our actual conversations had never achieved. She wrote about the proposal at the lake, our first serious fight about her spending habits, the miscarriage we'd suffered in year 3 that we'd never properly processed together, and the gradual shift in how she'd started seeing me less as a partner and more as a provider. Then, eventually as an obstacle to the lifestyle she thought she deserved. The level of self-awareness in that letter was both encouraging and heartbreaking. She admitted to resenting my contentment with our life when she'd always wanted more status and luxury. She acknowledged comparing our modest lifestyle unfavorably to her friends' flashy displays, even though she knew most of them were drowning in debt to maintain appearances. She even confessed to flirting with a coworker the previous year, though she insisted nothing physical had happened. The USB drive contained audio files that she claimed were recordings of her therapy sessions, shared with her therapist's permission. I could only stomach listening to one of them. Hearing her dissect our marriage with a stranger, hearing the genuine confusion in her voice as she tried to explain why she'd said such cruel things about my potential death, was too intimate and raw for me to process. I deleted the audio files after that single session and stored the letter in my document box. I'm not sure if I'll ever read it again, but it felt wrong to throw away something that had clearly required significant emotional labor to produce. Around day 75, Theodore announced that his relationship had progressed to the point where his girlfriend was considering moving in with him. Not immediately, but within the next few months. He assured me I could stay as long as necessary, but the subtext was clear. It was time for me to establish a more permanent living situation. That weekend, I toured several apartments and signed a 6-month lease on a decent one-bedroom place with a walkable downtown location and a kitchen that would actually accommodate cooking real meals. Moving day came with help from Theodore and 2 other friends. 4 hours of carrying boxes and furniture up 3 flights of stairs because the building's elevator was broken. That first night alone in my own apartment, I finally opened the folder of photos on my external hard drive. 7 years of digital memories, vacations, holidays, random weekday moments of happiness that I'd forgotten about during the trauma of the past few months. Pictures of Abigail laughing at something off camera, sleeping with her mouth slightly open, looking at me in the early days of our relationship like I was the most fascinating person she'd ever met. I didn't cry while scrolling through those images, just sat there feeling the full weight of everything we'd built together and everything we'd lost through her moment of casual cruelty. Day 80 brought another email from Abigail requesting a second meeting. She wanted to discuss what would happen when our 6-month separation period ended, still 3 months away, but apparently weighing on her mind as a crucial deadline. We met at a different coffee shop this time, even more neutral territory. She looked healthier than she had at our first meeting, like she'd been sleeping better and taking care of herself more consistently. Her hair was cut to a stylish shoulder length. She wore minimal makeup, and her clothes were simple but well fitted. The expensive designer accessories had been replaced entirely by practical items. Our conversation was remarkably direct. She asked point blank whether I was leaning toward reconciliation or divorce when the separation period ended. I told her honestly that I still hadn't decided, that 3 months of space hadn't provided the clarity I'd hoped for, but had at least given me perspective on what we'd both need to change if we wanted to try rebuilding something together. She asked what I wanted from her, and I found myself giving an answer I hadn't fully formed until that moment. I wanted to see genuine change sustained over time, not just the crisis-driven modifications she'd made since I left. I wanted to understand why she'd been able to say such cruel things so casually, and whether that capacity for callousness was a fundamental part of her character or a symptom of deeper problems we could actually address. Most importantly, I wanted to know if she was changing because she genuinely recognized her mistakes, or because she was afraid of losing the financial security and domestic comfort I'd provided. The distinction mattered more than anything else she could say or do. She nodded thoughtfully and handed me another sealed envelope, saying it contained her thoughts about both possible outcomes of our separation. She asked me to read it when I was ready, and let her know my response whenever I felt prepared to make a decision. I opened the envelope 3 days later and found the most mature, reasonable document I could have imagined coming from the woman who'd wished for my death just 4 months earlier. She'd outlined 2 completely different paths forward with equal detail and apparent sincerity. For reconciliation, she proposed 6 months of intensive couples therapy before we even considered living together again. Complete financial transparency from both sides, including shared access to all accounts and credit reports, regular relationship check-ins to address problems before they festered, and annual evaluations of our marriage health and goals. For divorce, she suggested a fair division of assets based on actual contributions rather than strict 50-50 splits, offered to buy out my share of the house at current market value, and proposed no alimony requests in either direction. She wanted a clean break with minimal legal involvement if possible. The document was thoughtful, fair, and completely unlike anything I'd expected from someone who'd shown such financial irresponsibility and emotional immaturity throughout our relationship. I emailed her that both sets of terms seemed reasonable and that I needed more time to make my decision. Day 90 arrived with a strange sense of symmetry. Exactly 3 months since I'd heard those devastating words in Mia's kitchen. I'd been thinking about symbolism, about cycles and endings and new beginnings when I decided to recreate the moment that had started this entire ordeal. I went to the same bakery where I'd bought Abigail's birthday cake and ordered exactly the same design. I drove it to my new apartment and set it on my kitchen counter, then took a photo and sent it to Abigail with no accompanying message. Just the image of a birthday cake in a different kitchen, a symbol of everything that had changed. and everything that might still be possible. She called immediately, and for the first time in 3 months, I answered her call. She didn't beg or demand explanations, just said she understood the symbolism and would accept whatever I decided about our future. She said she was proud of how I'd handled myself throughout this crisis with dignity instead of vengeance, and that regardless of what happened between us, she was grateful I'd forced her to confront the person she'd become. I told her I was meeting with my lawyer the next day, not to file for divorce necessarily, but to understand exactly what each choice would mean practically and legally. She said she'd be waiting for my decision whenever I was ready to share it, and we ended the call without drama or demands or ultimatums. Tonight, I'm sitting in my apartment with the remains of that birthday cake, reflecting on the strangest 3 months of my life. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can survive the complete destruction of my assumed future and build something new from the pieces. I've discovered that silence can be more powerful than confrontation, that dignity in crisis commands more respect than emotional retaliation. I've also learned that people can change when they're forced to confront the real consequences of their actions, though whether that change is permanent remains to be seen. The woman who wrote that reasonable separation agreement seems genuinely different from the one who laughed about my potential death, but time will tell if her transformation can survive the test of daily life together. I don't know yet whether Abigail and I have a future worth fighting for. The wound she inflicted was deep, and some injuries change you permanently even when they heal. Trust, once shattered so completely, might never be fully restored regardless of how much both parties want it. But I do know that whatever decision I make will come from a place of strength rather than fear, clarity rather than confusion, self-respect rather than desperation. The man who left that cake on Mia's counter 3 months ago would have set himself on fire to keep Abigail warm, would have accepted any explanation she offered just to avoid the pain of losing her. The man writing this tonight knows his own worth and won't settle for a relationship built on anything less than genuine respect and affection. Tomorrow I'll meet with my lawyer and start making the legal arrangements for whichever path I choose. I'll either begin the process of rebuilding a marriage based on honesty and mutual growth, or I'll finalize the end of a relationship that taught me everything I never want to accept again. Either way, I'm at peace with myself and the process that brought me here. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for becoming the person you were always meant to be. I'll share one final update after I make my decision, but for now, I'm signing off from this strange chapter of my life. Thanks for following this journey with me, internet strangers. Your support, advice, and occasionally questionable suggestions for revenge have been exactly what I needed when my world fell apart. Still standing, still breathing, still growing, stronger every day. This is Noah, signing off until the final chapter.